Blender projects can take a lot of time, so in this video you'll learn the most important hotkeys to speed up your workflow. Let's launch Blender and press Ctrl and comma to open the preferences window, and from there I'll go to the add-ons and enable the node wrangler, which will come in handy later. Close that window and press A to select everything and then X to delete it. Then press Shift plus A to open a menu and just add a cube. You can select it in the menu or start typing the name and it will show up automatically. You can also add the modifiers and nodes in the same way, but there is an even easier way to add subdivision surface. Select your object and press Ctrl and the number of subdivision level you want, and it will be added to your selected object. If you want to apply your modifier, just hover over it with your cursor and press Ctrl and A. Now let's start transforming the cube. If you want to move it freely, press the G key, and from there you can lock it to the X, Y or Z axis by pressing the according keys. If you want to exclude an axis, hold Shift and Z and you'll exclude the Z axis. Those rules also apply for the scale and rotation. You can also snap it by holding Ctrl, enable precision mode by holding Shift, or you could combine both and you will get a precise snapping to the grid. There are also other ways of transforming objects in Blender, for example rotation. If you want to rotate your object, just select it and press R, and if you want to rotate it freely, press R once again. If you hold Ctrl while rotating, you will be rotating it for 5 degrees at a time. To scale your object, just press S, and you can also hold Ctrl to enable snapping and Shift to scale it precisely. If you want to reset the scale, rotation or position, just press Alt S for scale, Alt R for rotation, or Alt G for position. Once you transform your object, you can press Ctrl and A, which will open up a menu from which you can choose the transform you want to apply. If you want to turn on snapping so you don't need to hold Ctrl, just press Shift and Tab, and if you want to change any other settings, you can access them in the drop-down menu. Right next to the drop-down menu, there is the pivot point menu, which you can access by holding the dot key on your keyboard, which will open this circular selection in which you can choose from different pivot point settings. The same goes for orientations, which you can access by holding the comma key, and you will be getting a similar circular selection. Lastly, if you want to zoom into your object, just press the number pad comma and you'll get right there. And now it's time for edit mode, which you can enter either by pressing Ctrl and Tab and you'll get the same circular selection again, or you can just press Tab and you'll instantly enter the edit mode from any other mode. Pressing Ctrl and Tab also works in the timeline and allows you to switch between graph editor and normal timeline. Alright, so now that we're in edit mode, let's check out the tools available. Just like before, you have the move, rotate and scale tools, which have the same hotkeys, but there is one important difference. If you perform a transform in edit mode, it will be instantly applied. But don't worry about that, because if you mess up, you can press Ctrl and Z to undo and Ctrl Shift Z to redo. Now let's begin with tools. Pressing E, you can extrude a vertex, edge or a face in any direction you want, but it gets better. If you hold Ctrl and right click, your selection will be extruded to the cursor, and it still doesn't end here. By pressing Alt E, you can open a pop-up window with different extrude options. Then if you press I, you can inset one or multiple faces, and you can also adjust the depth by holding and moving your mouse. When you finish and left click with your mouse, a pop-up screen that contains all the inset settings will show up in the left corner for you to adjust your inset even further. Next up, we have bevel, which you can activate by pressing Ctrl and B. By scrolling your mouse wheel, you can add or remove segments and confirm the bevel by left clicking. When you do that, you'll get another pop-up screen in the left corner in which you can change all the beveling settings. Then there is the loop cut. If you press Ctrl R, it adds a new loop cut to your object. In the pop-up menu, you can adjust the number of cuts, smoothness and some other settings. Similar to the loop cut is the knife tool, which can be toggled on by pressing K, and you will get a knife that allows you to connect vertices and edges. To use it, you just need to left click and drag it to another vertex or edge, and if you hold Shift, it will lock to the center of an edge. Finally, to confirm your cut, just press Enter. To select between vertices, edges and faces, you can press 1, 2 and 3 to switch between different selection modes. If you want to merge vertices, you can press M and you'll get a menu from which you can choose your merge. All these tools are very useful, and to access them faster, you can press Shift and Spacebar to open yet another pop-up window where you have all the tools and their hotkeys, and you can also navigate through it using the scroll wheel. On top of that, this hotkey works in every single one of the 6 modes. So yeah, that's pretty cool, but you can also execute pretty much every Blender command by pressing F3, which will open up a search bar where you can just write the command down and hit enter to confirm it. Now let's get back to the edit mode. There are many ways to select faces, edges and vertices, You could just click every single one by hand, or you can press C to get the circle select tool and hold left click to select and middle click to deselect elements. You can also select loops by holding Alt and left clicking on an edge of an element you want the selection to go to, and select multiple loops by holding Alt and Shift and left clicking. Another way is to select a face and Ctrl click on another face. That way Blender will automatically connect all the elements in the shortest path between the two. The final way we're going to check out is slightly more complicated. Press Shift and G, which will open up a menu from which you can select elements by materials, normals, face regions, areas, and so on. And then there are nodes. You can add them in the same way as you add objects in edit or object mode by pressing Shift A, and then you can just drag a connection out of a node and write which node you want to add to that connection. You can then join those nodes into a group by pressing Ctrl and J and rename the group with F2, but if you decide you don't want it anymore, you can just select it and press X to delete it. It's also possible to join two connections into a dot by holding Shift and right click, dragging over both with your cursor. Similarly, you can delete a connection by holding Ctrl and right click, dragging over it with your cursor. If you want to take a node out of a connection, just hold Alt and drag it out. By pressing O, you can connect a node to the group output instantly and bypass all the other nodes. Now this next one is my favorite. By holding Shift and Alt and right click dragging to another node, you can easily select where you want to connect your nodes to, or you can just hold Alt and right click drag to another node and it will connect to the first available input. You can also quickly switch between node inputs by selecting the node and pressing Alt and S. If you want to completely reset the node, you can press backspace and all the values will go back to the original ones, or you can just press M and disable the node while still keeping it in the node tree. Now let's hop from geometry nodes to the shading. In your material, you can select the principled BSDF and press Ctrl and T to add an image texture, or you can just press Ctrl Shift and T and the entire material setup will be made for you. If you want to add a mixed shader on top of two shaders, just select them and press Ctrl and 0, and if you want to switch links, you can press Alt and S. And finally, you can hold Z in the viewport and a circular menu will pop up from which you can select your preferred shading mode. Now let's go back to the viewport where you can press Shift and D to duplicate elements, but that can start lagging when you have too much geometry. So when you're working with bigger models, just press Alt and D and you will clone your object, meaning it will keep all the materials and edit data the same, which will reduce the lag and improve your rendering speed. Alright, now that you have all these duplicates, you can parent them by pressing Ctrl and P, which will give you a menu in which you can choose your desired parent type. And if you want to unparent them, you can press Alt and P. Now the question is, how do you animate your objects fast? Well, you can press I and give every transform of your object a keyframe, or press K and a menu with all animatable options will show up at your cursor. All of our created keyframes have now showed up in the timeline, and to manipulate them even further, you can switch to the graph editor by pressing Ctrl and Tab. Then you can select your keyframes and press T to change their interpolation. And just like with the objects, you can scale, rotate and reposition your keyframes by pressing S, R or G. And for the end, you can save a file by pressing Ctrl and S, open a file by pressing Ctrl and O, render an image by pressing F12 and render an animation by pressing Ctrl and F12. That's it for the video. If you think I've missed any of the important hotkeys, make sure to comment down below. Thanks for watching and goodbye.